Hey everybody, welcome to Playbook by Laserforce Loveland. This podcast is a platform for laser tag players to geek out about strategies, stories, and ongoings in the Laserforce scene, and for you to join us as another player at the table. My codename is Mischief. I'm a player from Loveland, Colorado who loves to talk about tag, and tonight I am joined by Death Knight from Sacramento, California, also known as DK. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Heck yeah, of course. Love having you on. Well, this is the first time, but I hope it won't be the last because you're a professor in real life. That's what you do for a profession, but I think that translates pretty well to your identity amongst the Laserforce scene.
I try to take complex ideas and distill them as simply as I can, but no simpler than that. So I guess that serves me well in both the laser tag world and my professional career.
Yeah, spoken like a true professor. Can you tell us a little bit about your origin story as a player?
Sure. So I started back in 1997 when I was 12 years old. Please don't try to do that math. It will be very depressing for me. And I actually got my first Space Marines League fees paid as my 13th birthday present, which was pretty cool for
Nice.
for 13-year-old me. We won the very first SM5 league that we did at our site, mostly because my team figured out how to double resupply before everybody else did, and that got us a lot more points in sort of the early part of the competition.
Mhm.
First Nats I played was in Sugar Land, Texas in 1999, where we won both the Space Marines 4 and Space Marines 5 comps, because back in the day we played more than just Space Marines 5 because we didn't have enough players. First Nats that I played with what I would call proper rules, that is the international rules, and against competition from the Southern Hemisphere, was in 2002 when I got stomped by Rusty, Night Owl, Dragon, and I don't even remember which Sugarland players they took. I'm sorry. It's no offense to them, but they could have taken like a mop, a broom, and a dustpan and just beaten the crap out of us. That's how big the skill gap was. So that like showed me where the bar was.
Sure.
We won Nats in 2004 at our home site in Sacramento, but it was a pretty small Nats. I think it was only about 4 teams, but it was still the first time that a U.S. team beat a Southern Hemisphere team in competition.
Mhm.
But there was nobody who was considered like the top echelon of the game from the Southern Hemisphere game. Like there was no Rusty, no Tragedy, no Fredo, no Beast, Mental, etc. People who were kind of considered the carry players back then. So
Sure.
I felt like I had done really well. It was personally meaningful for me, but I didn't feel like I had risen to the level that I wanted to. I really wanted to test myself against
Mhm.
Rusty and against really great players from down under like that as well. Our site switched to zone shortly after. I didn't get to play again for about another 4 years. We won again in 2009, but that was basically when Nats was just getting back off the ground in the US. And basically everybody else we played against was the first time they'd played any kind of Laserforce tournament, other than
Mhm.
Disco Stew, I think, because he'd played back in the day too. Um, so those were like early career wins and things like that. But I didn't really feel like they were real titles in the sense of how people talked about the game in the Southern Hemisphere and hearing stories from Fan and Night Owl and other players that I talked to on a regular basis. So it was always a goal of mine to beat the Brisbane team and to beat Rusty just because he was the best player I'd played against to that point in
Sure.
a Nats, because I've just always followed the philosophy that to be the best, you have to beat the best. So I always
Mhm.
wanted to test myself against that top level of competition. Came close in 2017, the next time we hosted nationals, but we couldn't quite close it in the final
Mhm.
matches against Brisbane. That was a real gut punch, and it was even more so when our site closed in 2019. That was a sad time, sad days, but it had a happy ending because we finally got it done this year with my good friends Slaughtermelon, Kodama, Thunder, Snuffles, and of course your co-host Odin's Fist.
That's right. Well, co-host for our 10 tips, but absolutely.
Yeah,
You
one of the many
you
co-hosts.
right. Yes, it was an incredible team to watch. And something, I think I want to delve into a little bit later, just the evolving of the tournament scene. Like you
Sure.
said, at one point, one of the teams could have taken a mop, broom, and another wooden stick and just beat everyone else by pure skill gap. But what I
Hmm.
saw at 2023 was that the skill level like it had closed so much that it came down to countering each other more with teamwork and strategy. And I mean, the scene's really evolved, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It is way different than it used to be. Obviously, Space Marines 5 is still Space Marines 5. The base game hasn't changed, but the strategy, the meta, if you will, has changed, and just the overall level of play has elevated so much. I used to think about, when was I really kind of when I felt I was playing at my best? And part of me thinks it was 2017. Another part of me thinks it was all the way back in 2004. But I
Mm-hmm.
review some of those old games, those old scorecards, and I'm like, there were just so many things we didn't know about the game. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like so many things. It's like, oh, well, if you took a player in X sport from the 1980s, how would they do today? It's like, well, they probably wouldn't do as well just because they don't know as much about all the things we've learned about nutrition and training and safety and just this how the strategies evolved over time. So I think it's
Right.
gotten the level of competition is probably as high as it's ever been. And the talent gap between a lot of the different sites is not nearly what it used to be. There used to be this really clear pecking order of sites about who was the best, who was almost certainly going to come in second, and you could almost rank the teams before you even played the tournament. But now there's a lot more surprises, and that's makes it a lot more exciting that way.
I completely agree. So, to date this episode just a little bit, in 1 year, Loveland is going to get to host Laserforce Internationals. It'll be our first time in about 8 years since no, 9 years since we entered the scene in 2015, when everyone came out and we hosted Nats without ever having played at an away tournament before. So, we thought we were good because we'd never played anyone outside of Colorado, really. And then we just got
Yep.
stomped by all these people who'd been playing for years, had a grip on the current meta, and used our arena in ways we never thought to use it. And this is really exciting. We really, on one hand, obviously we want to win. And I can tell you that we're going to give our absolute best lineup, best strategies. We see this sort of as like, for me, I see this as like, this is our shot. And I'm not going to think about there ever being another shot because it could come 10 more years down the road if it does, But
I'm living proof. You never know.
right, exactly. But we also want to let people come and practice. We want our general strategy to be kind of the meta to be kind of open to the public. We're given lots of GoPro videos. I mean, we don't necessarily want to win because we deprived everybody else of the ability to practice and adjust and have a fair shot at giving us their best. We want everyone to
Sure.
send their best out and have opportunities to really make it a true competition, so that there's no doubt in anyone's mind.
That's what makes it meaningful.
Right, exactly. Um, yeah, like we did win our West Coast 2018, and that was a huge accomplishment for us. But very few people actually came out. So we are happy about it, but we really are looking at this like, okay, if we can win this will be the chance to prove, because there won't be any excuses. Everyone should be sending out their best. And
Oh, absolutely. I'm counting on it. I think it'll be a great turnout from U.S. Players, and it'll be I think a fierce competition if sites really do up and send their best.
absolutely. So look, in full disclosure, I'm being very selfish with this podcast. I want to pick your brain a little bit about the topic today. Just team building, roster construction, how you get from a group of 6 players that you don't even know who they are yet, all the way to the finals elimination match. So I'd love
It's
to.
definitely.
Oh,
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
No, I'm just saying I'd love to pick your brain today and go through
It's
some questions.
yeah, absolutely. Fire away.
I mean, for some context, there's been a fair number of bouts between your team versus my team throughout different tournaments over the years. At some points, we were just so new that there was almost no chance we'd be able to pull off a win against you. At other times, it really did come down to strategic decisions that won the day, one team over the other. And I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
can remember playing against you guys in 2021 in Syracuse, and those were some hard fought battles. And I remember finals was like running an
mhm.
absolute gauntlet. Syracuse B threw a haymaker at us, and we had to recover from that. You guys
Mm-hmm.
fought us super hard, and then we had to go up against the Cedar City guys who had mostly beaten us during the week and make some adjustments to try to get ahead of them. But I remember thinking you guys were like right on the edge in 2021, and I'm just like, oh, they're just a little bit more
I
to
know.
get over the top, and they'll be right here with everybody else.
Yeah. And on one hand, it's disheartening to continuously not quite be there, but you have to look at the competition, and so many people on your team had been going through it to get to that point. Like no one didn't earn that victory. You guys fought super hard, and it was teamwork that won the day for you because you were projected fourth coming into that tournament. You came out second.
We're really projected fourth. Oh, I got to talk to some people about that.
Oh yeah, you were ranked below us coming in. Hmm.
Well, that'll teach everybody. Don't underestimate the old man.
That's right.
And also, the kids who I actually make do the hard work on the team.
I'm saying all this to give the people context that DK he's a very experienced captain, and he's built a lot of teams that, he's lost a lot and he's won a lot too. He's learned from those losses. So
Losing is never a
DK,
true loss if you learn from it.
that's right. So DK, I want to start out. What are the most important elements of a successful SM5 team?
Well, it used to be easy back in the day because you might only have 6 good SM5 players at your site, or you might have only had 6 people who were actually willing to travel. But now, as the scene has expanded and you start having to make decisions and cuts, and occasionally when you have to combine people from different regions for an overseas trip or something like that, first and foremost is chemistry. Like, overall
Mm,
talent is obviously important. You need to take players who are very skilled if you want to win a tournament, but not if your players can't play well together. The best 6 players that you have is not necessarily the best team unit. Because if you think about it, how did the people get to be considered the best 6 players? It's probably because they're the players who know how to score a lot of points, how to do a lot of damage to the other team, how
mm-hmm.
to kind of backpack players who are not quite as good as them, and they rarely get to play together. But because they're all used to being the one wearing the backpack and having other people ride along, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to slot in and play the role they need to play on the team for all kinds of reasons. You just may not be used to it. There could be, I don't want to say a clash of egos, but egos are a real thing
It
that you
happens.
need to manage. And sometimes people aren't going to be happy playing certain roles. So just choosing like, well, who are the best 6 most talented players is not always going to be the recipe for success, especially because you need people who can handle roles that are not necessarily as offensive minded or about scoring as many points as possible. Like, somebody's got to play medic. And if all 6 of you are used to just going out and killing everything in sight and never hanging back and ducking and letting discretion be the better part of valor, you're not really going to have as many opportunities to preserve your medic's lives as you otherwise would.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say, is that chemistry is the more important element than just raw talent. Like, teamwork is going to beat superior talent if they're relatively close. Obviously, if just one team is way more talented than another, they're probably going to win. But in those close marginal situations, the team that works together better is going to have the edge. And I think part of getting that chemistry together is having a shared vision and a shared goal for what you want to do during the tournament, which doesn't have to be winning the whole thing, by the way. Like, I played on the Oakley team in 2018 when we went to
Mm-hmm.
Brisbane. We had no pretensions of winning that tournament. We were going to play as well as we could and to
Mm-hmm.
win as many games as we could, but we knew we didn't have a shot at winning. But it was a chance to play together, to hang out, to just have some fun and things like that. And that's totally fine. This year, the philosophy was totally different. When we got the 6 of us together and we started having conversations at laser tag and especially on Discord and things like that, the first thing that we agreed was, look, we're in this to win, right? Not to take second, not to just go and have a fun international vacation, which we obviously did anyway. But like, the
Mm-hmm.
tournament is the tournament, and when it comes to tournament time, we're going to focus. And I think it's important sometimes to be able to actually articulate that, to talk about having that shared goal and that shared vision,
Hmm.
because sometimes you might think that that goes without saying, but it really doesn't. And when you suddenly have a mix of those mentalities coming in, if one person thinks that they're there to win, and another person thinks that they're there, well, this is just going to be a fun week and we're going to hang out and have some fun and don't need to take it too seriously. That's when the friction kind of starts, and that you start to lose that chemistry because people just don't have a match in what they want there.
Yeah, that's a lot that you just said right there. And it kind of leads into one of my other questions, which was just, you know, I'm the captain of the Loveland A team. I am currently looking at 9, 10 players, honestly. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's new up and coming talent, there's people with tons of experience, there's people that are really hungry, others that are more playing for fun, but they'd be really good. Like, how do you compare individual talent versus like people who synergize well? And maybe even like, are there certain roles that matters more with?
Yeah, I mean, measuring that individual talent versus synergy is always a difficult thing. But I would say like rule number one when you're just getting a tournament team together is get players who don't suck. Now, like
That's a
I
pretty
should
good
probably
rule of
explain that
thumb.
because
All
yeah,
right, that's
I
it
don't
for
mean
this
like
week, folks. Let's have a good night.
get players who don't suck. Like and I'm not just talking about talent. Obviously, like I said, you want to have talented players, but most everybody who's considering playing in an international tournament is going to be a talented player to one degree or another. So it doesn't mean that everybody has to be at the absolute top level, that everybody has to be as good as your best player. But players who suck do things like give up in games. Players who
Hmm.
suck blame others or the refs or just blame some other external factor rather than looking at what could I have done better. Players who
Mm.
suck don't commit to growth. They get stagnant. They get too comfortable in what they're doing and think that if they just keep doing the same thing over and over again, that it's going to lead to success because they've had success in the past. And that's not always going to be true. And
Hmm.
players who suck aren't willing to talk about adjustments. There's like, nope, this is what I do. This is my role. This is the only thing that I want to do. Those are sucky tendencies to have. So like, don't get players who are stuck in those ways. I don't like expect players to play above their level, but I do expect them to do the jobs that they were chosen for well. And the jobs they're chosen for might vary because like looking at player history counts when you're looking at individual talent versus synergy with other people. Like,
Hmm.
has this player done well in a variety of roles? Have you only ever seen them play one position at tournaments? Have you seen them play multiple positions at tournaments? How do they do on social
Hmm.
nights? Have they been on different teams? Have you seen them at random draw tournaments? Have they
Hmm.
played well or had success with different types of players?
Hmm.
Are there people that you're watching on a nightly basis who just, for lack of a better term, who just attack well together? Like one of the main reasons that I really wanted Thunder and Snuffles for the Nats team that we had this year was I saw all the attacks that they did at the West Coast you guys hosted in 2022, and they
Hmm.
were like instinctively flanking, taking opposite angles without even having to communicate. Like every single time I watched them, like
Hmm.
those are the people who have the synergy, who obviously have this kind of a bond with each other and know what the other person is going to do, and they know what they're supposed to do. And
That.
then
Sorry.
as a side to that, are there people who are close outside of games whose friendship you can, I don't want to say exploit, whose friendship you can make an
You
asset?
can count on.
Yeah, that you
Yeah.
can count on. And on the flip side, are there some players who might be super close and are good friends outside of tag, but maybe don't play well together?
Hmm.
Autumn and Aiden, just saying.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Autumn taught Aiden everything that they know.
Absolutely true, and they were both very
Hmm.
good players, but they have both commented that
Okay.
they put each other on tilt when they're on the same team.
Yeah. So, oh, man, I was gonna say something good.
Sorry, I talk
Um.
too much.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah, so when you pick players who have a natural synergy together, it's almost like you're saving yourself a lot of the groundwork that you would otherwise have to establish with players who maybe have never played together before or who don't have that natural synergy where they
Hmm.
got to pick up on each other's habits. If you got people that are already paired up really well, they can build off of that from day 1 to day 5 or through the practice period leading up to a tournament.
For sure. And just getting those additional reps in and getting the reps in with other people so that you can start building, well, these two have synergy, these two have synergy, and these people, haven't really integrated themselves with the team, that hopefully that kind of stuff starts building with one another.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the specific classes in SM5 regarding synergy? A lot of people will say the 3 hits should be synergized, the resupply should be synergized, the commander and the scouts should be synergized, etc. Is there any, in your mind, any method to, is that real, or how much should it be considered?
I definitely think that it's real. The obvious answer, I mean, you covered most of the critical combinations. The obvious answer, I would say, is the resupply players. But in my mind, that can kind of come with time. That one is actually kind of the easiest to fix because the most common issues that resupply is going to have is they get out of sync with doubles because they're getting their signals crossed, or they're not communicating where you need to go on a flush, and maybe they get separated more than they should. Those
Hmm.
are somewhat easy things to fix, but other things that are harder to fix until you've practiced them a lot are like that commander scout attack is the critical offensive version, I think. The 3-hit
Hmm.
synergy is great, but in a lot of cases they're going to be switching off with one another rather than attacking together. If you can get them to attack together, that's great, but you can't always count on that. But the commander and scout together, both because they have really high resupply caps so they can stay in the field longer, and because they're usually going to be at kind of the front line of the attack and attacking the enemy reset people. It opens up way more options if you have a good scout with a commander than just having a lone commander bludgeoning people.
Hmm.
An effective scout can watch their back. They can take that crucial hit off the heavy, so the commander only needs to hit them once. They can run distractions, so maybe people turn their heads, or they might be just the final component in breaking a resupply stronghold. Maybe the commander puts everybody down except the medic. Now, if your scout comes in and they can just make that one crucial tag, suddenly you've really made a transformative play that you couldn't have made by yourself.
Right.
Um, an example that I would put from that is we talked about this in constructing the roster for this year. Was the initial thinking, especially among some of the Utah guys, was they wanted to utilize the synergy that Caleb and Snuffles had together, and maybe putting Snuffles on heavy. And when we kind of experimented with some of the roles, we thought that Snuffles might actually be a better pure scoring heavy than Kodama, but it was a lot better for the overall team to take advantage of that Caleb Snuffles and Snuffles Thunder dynamic if we had him at scout instead of heavy, because
Hmm.
those weren't question marks for us. We knew that those combos would work well, and that the dynamic that Odin and I had with Kodama in between resupply and heavy was probably a little bit more familiar because that was something that we had also practiced going back a few years. Um, and even more so, I would say, than the ammo medic dynamic, it's the heavy ammo dynamic that's super, super
Interesting.
critical on the
Hmm.
back line. It is probably the single best defensive tool in the game to have an ammo and a heavy who can play off of one another. If you have an ammo who can very quickly reset the heavy when they need their shield reset, or who can act as a reset so the heavy can get a missile and push somebody out of your base, and just to work together to keep attackers out so that way your medic stays more protected longer. So
Mm.
like the ammo has to, this is why I think ammo is a crucial position and a hard position to play, because you need to have a really good dynamic with two different players in completely different relationships. You need to be on the kind of lives and shots management with the ammo or with the medic, and you need to be on that defensive kind of backline with the heavy to keep everybody else in their proper roles and functioning as a team properly.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but that's not one that people typically talk about. Odin and I are going to be recording 10 ammo tips tomorrow, and I'm sure they're going to have something to say about that. Because Odin was always talking about how they were trying to innovate the position, And there's so much that ammos have often played just like medics and sort of sat in the corner. But linking the heavy and the ammo, I can definitely see what you mean. Resetting shields, being used as a reset, providing extra vision, all that stuff. Um, Maybe people should think of the ammo more like the way that people, whatever the scout is to the commander, maybe the ammo is to the heavy in a sense.
Yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting analogy, I would say, because those pairings, although like you said, not necessarily the most intuitive, are actually pretty crucial because they're going to be spending more time together during the game. At least it's more likely that they will.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if you can push both your 3 hits out and have them both attack, that's awesome. But in a lot of cases, they're going to be on kind of different ends of the field.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I don't think ammo really plays like any other position. Like it plays like a medic in the sense they're both resupply players, but that's where the comparison ends. Other than that, the two positions don't play anything alike. And now having mained a tournament as an ammo several times, but finally doing it as a medic this year, it is a completely different mindset, a completely different style of play you have to adjust to playing medic rather than ammo.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder if I can get your thoughts because we were doing the 10 medic tips and we were coming to this theory that in the modern day, like the meta, a medic has the ability to be somewhat of a leader and shot caller on the field due to having more mental space and not having to be fighting as actively as everybody else. What are your
Yeah, at
thoughts on
least
that?
ideally
Because
not. At least ideally
I,
not.
I mean, you seem to be shot calling on your team at Nats. That was what I saw from the ref spot. What do you think?
Yeah, that was kind of the plan going in, was that other people had different jobs to do, and it's much better if the ammo doesn't have to worry about shot calling and they can just focus on watching their angle or being on defense, and you can call them over when there's 1 second or a half second left to resupply somebody. And for the heavy to be able to know, like, okay, when do I come back? When do I push out? Those kinds of things, just the kind of management of the team and the flow of the game, those can be hard things to think about when you have so many other things that are going on. You're managing your own shots and lives. You're trying to break the enemy resup. So if you can keep the medic protected enough and give them enough information that they can provide that sort of organization, be a shot caller, I think that could be really useful. And that the medic can hopefully be in a spot where they're able to gather and relay some information as well. It depends a little bit on the field. Sometimes you're just going to have to be in a super protected corner, but in other cases, you might take a position that's a little bit more visible, not necessarily taking a bunch of shots, but at least you can see a lot and call things out to your
Right.
team.
Now, why don't we get it on public record real quick? In the final game of Nats, Odin did not send DK to go die on Rusty's sword. It was DK who sent himself to go and attack Rusty at the very last moment.
I volunteered for that suicide mission. I mean, Rusty did just happen to kind of come up to where I was because I had sent everybody else out of the tower once we'd flushed them down. And I'm like, okay, I will just stand at the top of the long ramp and look out and see anything. And as soon as I saw Rusty come upstairs from the other ramp, I just did everything I could to call him out until the rest of my team got there.
Oh, definitely. Man, just standing as a ref in the arena during that final game, I had never heard somebody screaming to murder other people as passionately as you were.
It was that was the alternate version. I think that was Fireball DK spilling back out.
It was pretty epic, trust me. Okay, so actually this is not a question that I had written out for you, but I just thought of it. Leadership out of game versus leadership in game. What dynamic do you think works best? Should there be people who are like decided ahead of time? Like if this person makes a call, we're all going to follow their lead. Should everyone have an equal say, like a round table, when it comes to calling shots in game? What do you think?
It's funny because we talked about this a number of times and we never really came to a full consensus about, okay, this person needs to be calling the shots. If this person says X, then we have to do X. It did kind of become not entirely by committee, but we sort of had just a decision that the most important player that we have on offense is the commander, just because they can do something that no one else can do, which is nuke. And the nukes are going to take lives off the enemy team the fastest. So whatever the commander says in terms of this is what I need to do to build nukes, like we should try to play around that as much as possible. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be the one who's setting the strategy for the game, or that, just because someone is the captain of the team, that they should be telling other players what to do. Like really the captain spot in most tournament stuff is just whoever can put up with the BS of organization. It doesn't have anything to do with actual leadership of a team to be the quote unquote captain.
Mm.
But and it's hard because I've never really like aspired to be or thought of myself as a leader, but I keep finding myself in positions where apparently I guess my leadership has been expected. And
Hmm.
to me, it's not really any different than just looking at what do players need and what helps make them thrive. For some people, that might be you kind of need to get on their case a little bit when you think that they're being too lax. For other players, they might need the soft touch. They might need a little bit of a pat on the back when they do something good, and maybe a little bit of a pep talk when something goes wrong.
Hmm.
So just like knowing how that dynamic is going to go and having players who are going to synergize around that, around not just what's our goal, but what's our attitude for the team. And I've seen different teams function differently. There are some teams who can get super intense and might be shouting at each other after a game, but when the chips are down, they know what they're supposed to do. And I've seen
Right.
other teams that come out that are very skilled who come out of a game, shout at each other. If it happens for 2 games in a row, they've gone to pieces and they don't play well the rest of the week because now all of them is nursing some kind of grudge against another player. So
Hmm.
like just knowing knowing your players, knowing what they need to succeed, I think is an important thing just for someone who is acting as a leader on a team. And people can be leaders at different times on teams. It doesn't always have to be one person. Anybody can step up and be a leader in a crucial moment. Sometimes it just takes somebody speaking up and saying something that might change the way you look at things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I know from my experience as a captain. You're playing with human beings. We have emotions and flaws and things that are inconvenient to the strategy of the team and the game, but that are just kind of real. Um, some I would always ask players on my teams like, if you're upset, what do you need from us? Do you need space? Do you need someone to come talk to you? Like whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And it's good to get that stuff out ahead of time. But I also agree with you that when you said quote unquote players that don't suck, I think like that's kind of a funny way of putting it, but um like I really know that people are I believe people are genuinely trying their best for the most part. And I know it's hard to come into such intense competition because it's rare you find this kind of competition like when you're going for a Nats. It can be a little
Yeah.
less intense at a West Coast or something, but people still play to win. And people's relationships do change. It's so much easier to get along with people when getting eliminated from a tournament isn't on the line. So choosing players that can synergize emotionally, and even if they are going to blow their top at some point, if they're the kind of player that you know will be able to recover from it and not cause permanent damage to your team, it can be all right, honestly.
Yeah, and because that intensity is also needed in order to have that competitive spirit and fire that you want to win the tournament. It's just being able to channel it into productive avenues. And I know this is
Yes, yeah.
definitely a focus for you on the channel because you talk about how to handle tilt, how to try to calm down quickly, how to
Hmm.
get your mental game in alignment, and that also takes practice, just like any other skill. If you're not practicing that on a weekly or monthly basis, you're missing out on things that are going to be important come tournament
Hmm.
time.
Absolutely. You know, the Loveland players are doing a really good job of this. They've been improving every single month. A lot of the Loveland players are pretty young, and part
Hmm.
of being young is learning to control your emotions, even outside of Space Marines. It's just something that every human being has to do. So that's why I put those videos out, because I think people maybe just don't always have the tools. And not everyone
For
wants to
sure.
listen to me talk for 100 minutes, so I put out a 2-minute version, you know?
Was that you? I thought that was Phil the Pharaoh.
Oh no, that was Phil. I got Phil to make the 2-minute version, but I have like a whole lecture. It's like an hour 40 on the channel as well.
Oh yeah, listen to that one too. It's a good one.
Heck yeah. All right, cool.
And I think that's important for players too. Is if I'm looking at players and considering whether or not somebody is kind of like ready to take the next step to be a league player, a tournament player, a Nats level player, is not how do they handle winning. Handling winning is
Mhm.
easy. How do they handle losing?
That's right.
Like
It's so
how someone
important.
handles losing is probably way more important.
Yes.
It's like in Star Trek. It's like the Kobayashi Maru test. Like how do you handle the no win scenario when when elimination is inevitable in a game and you know that there's nothing you can really do to stave it off? Does
Hmm.
that cause you to go to pieces? Are you just going to like walk around and accept your fate, or are you going to try to learn something at the end of the game and say, well, maybe I can find a place where I can avoid getting tagged for 20 seconds that might be of use in some future match that might mean the difference between winning and losing somewhere down the line. So are you willing to go out with a bang, or are you just going to kind of go off with a whimper?
That's exactly right, man. I know this one from experience as well. You Not only is it really rough for the player themselves when they give up in a game, but when your teammates see you giving up, it can cause such a morale destruction for the team as a whole. It
Yeah.
feels like a betrayal to the other players when somebody throws in the towel, or they're blaming to such an extent that nothing productive is happening and they're making the team get off in a worse way. You would love to hear you talk just real quick about your team dynamic, because I think Odin was saying that you all would come out and every single game you'd be talking about what happened that last game, sometimes even if it was a win, just trying to
Hmm.
extract what you can learn from it.
Yeah, and you, I think, usually learn more from your losses than from your wins. But there are still things that you want to review, like what went well in that game, or what are things we could have done even better. Like, when you dropped that first nuke, did anybody get into the medic? When the enemy team flushed, was anybody covering their most likely angle of escape? Should we have done our base run at a different time? How were the boosts timed? All of those kinds of things that might play into little adjustments you need to make later on are important. And we just wanted to have those conversations in a sane and civil manner. And I think all of us kind of just gravitated to being on the team and really kind of selecting one another, because I wouldn't say it came down to any one person who got the team together. We all kind of had a pretty similar idea of who we wanted to take with us, because we knew we all had the same kind of attitude. Like, okay, when you lose, don't blow up on somebody. Just think about it, process it, and let's try to unpack it as much as we can. Because I know just from having conversations that they think about laser tag at such a high level. I'm not saying that any one person has more of a mind for the game, but like just picking Thunder's brain in a 2 hour conversation, just the guy thinks about laser tag on so many different levels, and
Hmm.
sometimes like has so much in his head that he doesn't even know where to start and what to say at a given time. But he can go on for 2 hours about just the minutia of how to do this one move in as one position, not even describing the position as a whole. And
Hmm.
those are like the kind of things we wanted to take advantage of, because there isn't a day that goes by, I think, where I don't think about laser tag at some point during the day. That's
Hmm.
just what an addict I am.
Yeah, it'd be criminal. Yeah. Okay, sweet. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
I have some other specific questions involving how you construct a team. What do you think of rostering 6 players versus 7?
So I'm definitely not a fan of rostering 7. I would avoid it if I could. I say this as somebody who's played on a couple of teams that have rostered 7. It just makes it that much harder to get those crucial dynamics down. Because like if you have 6 players and let's say that you think all of them can play the positions equally well, that's 30 possible combinations that you have of different players in different spots. When you
Hmm.
add a 7th player, that goes up to 42. So that just
Hmm.
there's way more variables that you have to account for. That's like almost 50% more
Right.
um, that you have to count. So who are you swapping in for what game? Is the quote unquote the 7th player in quotes going to be cool sitting out in the crucial match? Like, is there a defined pecking order? Like, okay, you guys are 5, 6, and 7, so that's kind of the order that we're selecting people in when we're thinking about like playing at the high level matches and things like that. Are you playing the exact same style when you swap in the alternate player? Probably not. Everybody's a little bit different. So even if you all have the same philosophy, there are probably a couple little adjustments like, oh, I was expecting this person to be in big box and they ended up at Baja instead, or they're over at Closet when I thought they were going to be at Chamber, or
Mm-hmm.
any of those kinds of things. It's just, the little tendency that I am used to playing with this one player, I have to do it slightly differently. And now you are thinking about, okay, well, if I change where I am, then somebody else might have to adjust based off of that. So there's just so many more variables you have to account for. It does have the potential advantages. I don't want to say that it's never useful. It has the potential advantages of being able to make some key adjustment against another team that maybe doesn't work in other situations. Like player X plays heavy super well from green, but they don't play as well from red. Or they play commander super great against team one, but they don't play it as well against team two. So it
Mm-hmm.
allows you to make those kinds of adjustments without necessarily sacrificing your other strengths. But it's just been my experience that is a really rare thing, that you truly have a kind of interchangeable roster, in that sense. I think it worked well it worked for Detroit in 2019 because they did basically know in advance what their lineup was going to be when the chips were down. Like, these are the players who are probably going to play in the crucial games against Brisbane. And they mostly only rotated their scouts against the better teams. Against some of the weaker teams, they would maybe elevate some people to play 3-hit who didn't play in the key matches. But in the key matches, it was pretty clear like what the pecking order was and who was going to be best used where.
Right. Yeah. When I think of seven, I recognize all your points. I agree with you on all those points. I've heard some people talking about, getting to let the players rest and give people rest games to last all week as a
Which is
potential
also true.
advantage.
Also true.
Because a week of tag is a lot, especially depending on how many games total you have to play. And I've also heard people say, well, it gives us more combinations that the enemy team isn't expecting. And the dynamic, maybe we're not as practiced on the dynamic, but neither are they against our dynamic. So it adds a little bit more chaos, I suppose.
You can give teams different looks. And I mean, if we were like a true professional sports league or something like that, I bet it wouldn't be uncommon for teams to roster like maybe 8 or 9 players if they were in
Mm-hmm.
some kind of competitive situation, because maybe you rotate people in and out if you have a ton of games to play, like you do in football or basketball or any other variety of sports, and getting rest is important. But
Right.
like when we have these focused comps, it's, yeah, where is the trade-off point? So surely you must have some kind of, I guess, imaginary graph for having an access that, okay, our potential number of combos like goes up in this direction, but the kind of different looks we can give the enemy team goes off in this other direction. So like, where do we find the nice little curve that gives us the best odds of countering other teams without sacrificing our own synergy and our own chemistry? But the other question, I mean, I think that you would want to ask as a site is that by rostering 7, are you potentially depriving like the B team of a player who could really boost their success?
Right.
Now, if you have 7 players who all believe that they really should be on the A team and everybody is willing to sacrifice a little bit, and that they really don't want to play with say the B team, even if they're going to be by far the best player on there, that's one thing. But if you can all be honest with yourselves and be like, well, look, this might mean the difference between the B team getting like 6th place and getting maybe like 4th or 3rd place, because they're just going to get that kind of like talent infusion if we take the 7th player we're rostering on the A team and have them play with B instead. But that can be really hard for somebody. I mean, I wouldn't want to step off an A team, and I couldn't blame anybody else for not wanting to either.
Yeah. Hey, can we talk about B teams for a second? Because
Let's
like
do it.
this is a common dilemma that anybody who's building AB teams are going to run into. And even me right now, trying to work on the Loveland A team, I have 9 or 10 people that I'm really looking at, and 8 or 9 of them are gonna feel like emotionally offended on some level if they don't make the A team.
Yeah.
And the B team is going to it's always inherently going to feel like a second place, second best thing. But I mean, I want to say a piece real quick, and I want to get just your thoughts on B teams in general.
Mm-hmm.
If this scene is growing as it is, we've always said that B team is future A team. The people on the B team are going to get probably more growth from the tournament than the people on the A team because they're going to have to face harder matchups. And
100% agree.
I wouldn't say that the goal of a B team is to take first place, but I do think it should be to take second. Or to take first and usurp the A team that disrespected them.
Oh God,
But
yeah. Like
but
I can think of scenarios in the past. In 2012, Sacramento was going to host a tournament. I was living in Portland at the time, so I really wasn't practicing on a weekly basis. And they were getting together what their A team for Nats was going to be, and my name was still thrown into the mix as a possibility for who they wanted to select. And they ended
Mhm.
up going with another group of six. And I'm like, that's totally fair. I can't come and practice with you guys every week. It doesn't necessarily seem fair to give me a spot on the A team. So I ended up on a really fun hybrid team and got to play with guys like Baden and Guy Next Door and Than, who I hadn't played with in a couple of years up to that point. I guess maybe I played
Mhm.
with the year before, but we hadn't played together as much as we used to way back in the day. So that was really fun. But boy, you better believe that every time I got to go against that Sacramento team, I was going 110% and trying to do as well as possible against them because yeah, you're allowed to have a little bit of chip on your shoulder, like,
Chip on the
oh,
shoulder, absolutely.
you didn't want to take me? Okay, fine, I'll show you what I can do. You guys think this other player is better than me? I'll show you they're not.
And it's totally normal to have that, for real. It can be a driving force to help you improve and become better. If you're a person listening right now who is being considered for a B team or you're captain of a B team, play your heart out. Get in there, and even though you know it's likely you're not going to take first, see how high you can place. The Detroit B team in 2019 took third place. That
Yeah,
means they were better in that tournament than every site in the world that showed up except for Brisbane. So in their own right, they earned a ton of respect, those 6 or 7 players.
absolutely. And that's the kind of thing you can accomplish because it's still a nationals or an internationals competition. You're playing against the absolute best that other sites have to offer. Why wouldn't you want to compete in that kind of situation, even if you're on a team that maybe is not expected to win? Like, throw a few upsets in there, impress some people,
Oh, yeah.
overperform, have some kind of victory you can point to, so that way in the future, like I think you said it perfectly. B team is future A team. So when you're kind of making those decisions and those cuts, I tend to think that the tie is just going to go to the experience because there's just fewer question marks. You know that those people have had more reps together, that they've been to more tournaments, they have a few more things in their bag of tricks. So if you have two players who look like they're kind of equally talented, but one has more experience, I think the tie probably kind of goes to them in that situation. But it again goes to what are we taking this player for? If you because you can't have more than one commander in a given game. So when you're looking at okay, well if we're going to select this next player, would it be better to have them as maybe a scout or a medic on the A team, or would it be better to have them as a commander heavy on the B team? Like what's going to be better not just for them but for the teams as a whole? Because there are definitely some people who would much rather say I would rather be the a 3-hit on the B team than be stuck at resupply all week on the A team. And that's fine. You're allowed to feel that way. If you really want to play
Mhm.
one position more than another, that's totally fine. For other people, it's like I will play whatever is going to put the team in the position to win because I just want to win. And spoiler, I'm
Pretty
describing
much.
myself in that situation.
For sure. Yeah, it's tough because I'd say pretty definitively you should take the best players that you need to form the best A team, and then you can think about the B team. But you also want players that are going to be motivated all week. And if you're kind
Mhm.
of if someone is half-heartedly playing a role they don't want to play on the A team, you probably don't want that player on the A team anyways if they're not given 100%.
No. So what are you willing to do? What adjustments are you willing to make to like submerge your ego or your reputation to the team goal if you're going to be on an A team? Like, I mean, say that you have three players who are all great attackers, but only one of them can be commander. The other two will need to play scout. Like, okay, what things do you start looking for beyond just raw score? Does one player tend to nuke at more opportune times? Is one player better at capitalizing when their own team nukes? What's like the aggregate score among all three of them when they each play their respective roles? Figuring those things out sometimes takes a lot of trials, and you want to be open to making those adjustments and trying some different things rather than saying, okay, this player needs to be commander, this player needs to be heavy, and you're selecting people for specific roles. I think flexibility is a big thing, and I recognize the irony in my statement because I don't think my team really changed up at all during the week of 2023 Internats, but we definitely did in practice games before that, and we felt reasonably good with our lineup throughout the week. But that was because we knew we could move things around if we needed to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was the best move for you in the moment. You decided instead of changing lineups, and I know you were thinking about it at some points contextually, but you decided, no, we're going to change the strategy rather than change the lineup. And that ended up being what was better for the team.
In most cases, yeah. And again, sometimes you want to take advantage of different things that have nothing to do with a player's raw skill at that particular position. Like we really considered in our early talks for the tournament of having Thunder at ammo because of how much he can control the game and be that kind of backline leader. But we came to the conclusion, one is that, well, in that sense, like Thunder and I are kind of similar players. We're both kind of like thinking about the flow of the game and are sort of the backline organizers. So maybe we didn't need both of us back there. And he was just too valuable in the field, especially if we were going to have Caleb and Snuffles out there. He would basically make any adjustment that was needed to make up for any potential weaknesses that they had. And having somebody who's out in the field being able to make that adjustment is huge. I don't necessarily think that ammo is Odin's best position, and I don't think that medic is my best position, but it was what was best for the team because we minimized weaknesses and built around strengths as much as we possibly could.
Yeah, that's exactly. You think about it like, okay, maybe you have one commander. Commander A is individually better than Commander B, but if Commander B is given Commander A as a scout, then the whole team's dynamic, the whole power level goes up because they empower each other. And you're trying to get the whole team to be at its best.
For sure.
People become more than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, or I look at the scenario, I think Auckland A from last year's Nats, or this year's Nats, I should say, is a good case study in this.
Yes, with Morange.
Yeah, with Morange and Leech kind of swapping during the week. Now, maybe if you look at their absolute peak of play, you could say that maybe Leech has a little bit of an edge in aggression on the commander side, like when it comes to just shredding the enemy medic and stuff, which is sort of how they wanted to play. But the combination of having Morange at commander and Leech at scout, I think there is no doubt that that was just a stronger combination. Even if you think Leech at his best maybe has a hair over Morange, and I couldn't say definitively one way or another, but that's probably what they were thinking. But there's no doubt in my mind that the combination just worked better that way.
Oh, absolutely.
Having Morange play commander and Leech play scout, it synergized their attack so much better.
Yeah, because Morange, it was more about Morange's scout, I think. Leech was playing a good commander, and Morange was playing a good commander. And it was clearly their plan to try to do this because later on in the week when they put G&D up to heavy, Leech went to commander at a certain. That's what I remember.
Yes.
But I remember playing against them when Morange was on scout, and Morange was ramming his head into the enemy team as a scout the way he would a commander, whereas Leech was able to sort of differentiate two different play styles out like that. And so, Morange is a great commander. They put him back on commander. He scored 13K a couple times. Leech would back him up, playing more of the support role.
He clearly got the job done.
Yeah, he was fantastic. So overall, it was the better team combination.
For sure. And a similar thing I think happened with Brisbane, that Rusty is definitely the best commander in the world. He's proven that time and again.
Mm-hmm.
but the team was functioning better. As Rusty made the comment that it was functioning better specifically against our team with Taipan at commander and Rusty at heavy. We were always kind of prepared going into that final match for them to switch back, because I just
Mm-hmm.
kept thinking to myself, like, there's no way Rusty's going to go into an elimination situation and not play commander. I've played the man for so many years at this point, but they did
Right.
stick with it, and Rusty was equally devastating, if maybe not more so, at heavy, and it was
Mm-hmm.
still a very, very difficult combination for us to try to go against. Like, pretty much our whole philosophy going in was, okay, we know that Rusty and Taipan are probably going to be 3 hits in some capacity. Like, we probably are not going to be able to surpass them with our 3 hits, but if we can try to closely match them, at least in terms of their kind of total offensive output, we just hope that like our scouts will kind of shine through. And that's not any shade to Brisbane scouts. It's just literally how much respect I have for Thunder and Snuffles, as I would take them against pretty much any 2 scouts in the world.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. So thank you for that. And I want to say one more thing about B teams before we move on from that. While we were talking about Rusty just a second ago, one golden nugget that I got from Rusty in Nats 2023. It was after the tournament was all over. We were talking, and I was getting to know the man a little bit. He basically got this idea that the real reward of playing SM5 is to play it at its highest level. It's not to take the first place trophy home, which is what we're all trying to do. But it's like, no matter if you're playing a members night game, if it's one of the round play games, or if it's finals, always be playing the game at its absolute peak. I mean, that's the reward in and of itself. And so if you're playing on a B team and you know that playing for the first place trophy realistically isn't likely in your range of outcomes, if you go in and you're just trying to beat every single team, every time you get that upset and B team gets, if they place higher than everyone was projecting them, I mean, that's a huge bonus on top of just going in to try to play at your best and grow. That's what it's for. And I don't blame you if you would rather try to win the first place trophy, but honestly, playing for your best will get you to the point where you can be playing for those first place trophies. I really believe that.
Yeah, I would agree with that philosophy overall, that the reward is playing the game at its highest level. That has to be kind of your guiding star and something that you're actively seeking out, because otherwise these tournaments would be too stressful if that isn't its own reward, because there is a lot of pressure
Yeah.
in these competitive situations. But if you really just like relish the competition and those very small edges that you're honing, because in the top level competition games, like, people aren't scoring 14, 15K. Like, that's cool to show off on a social night, but good commanders in a really tight Nats game might only score like 10K.
Mm-hmm.
A really good scout score in a super competitive game is like 6,500.
Mm-hmm.
Thunder made this great point when we were having these conversations in the run up to the tournament, that he's like, yeah, if you get your bases and then you score 300 points a minute, that's 6,500 points at the end of the game. Like, that's all you really need to do. So don't feel like you need to take over the game as a scout. Like, grind it out, get your 300 points a minute. And if you're doing that and you have 6.5K at the end of the game, that's really good in a high level competitive game.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay. I want to move on to tryouts. If you're a captain, you're
Sure.
doing tryouts, what do you look for? How do you
Well,
run them?
whether players know it or not, I'm kind of always looking at league and tournament situations as quote unquote tryouts of a sort, to see who elevates their game. And I include myself in that. Honestly, after the super team stacked pancakes that I was on in West Coast 2022, after we took third place, that was like a bucket of cold water. I mean, I'm like, am I maybe not as good as I thought I was? Do I need to re-examine where I fit in this game? So when we played that St. George random draw later in the year, that was kind of a tryout for me to see, am I still able to compete against some of the other really good players? And I felt like I
Mm-hmm.
played much better that week. So it just gave me the desire to try to keep getting better. But it's a similar thing on member nights. Just who's improving their play for specific roles? What are they doing to shine out in particular roles? Like if I'm thinking about taking someone as a scout or as a resupply and say, hey, I really liked how you played alongside this commander, because sometimes it is those players who are sort of on the rise who learn to organize their game and to style their game around the better players that they're with. Sometimes they have an easier time adjusting to that role of maybe being a supporting player on a Nats team than people who are used to always being the kind of tip of the spear attack, who are always the carry players on their team. Sometimes it's harder for them to get into the mindset of being a more support player. So are there people who are improving in specific roles? And that's why, for me, and here I'll just get on my soapbox for a second. It's a real pet peeve of mine that I see top players screw around on social nights when it's random draw and they play resup, especially medic. And it seems like their whole goal is, well, let me see if I can score 6K as medic. For one thing, I think it sets a bad example to other players that this is a position that doesn't need to be taken seriously, and that this is a joke that I would ever be put on this kind of position. It can be detrimental to the team because you start screwing around in the first couple of minutes, like, oh, look how many points I'm scoring. And then you put yourself in a situation where you lose like 6 lives real quick. And now all of a sudden your team is scrambling. And it promotes bad habits overall. So like I'm looking for people who are always looking to improve, not just how many points they're scoring, but are they able to adapt to what their role is in a given game, what the situation calls for. I'll also be looking at things like, is someone improving rapidly in their stats week after week? Thanks, lfstats.com. Here's your plug.
Love it. LF Stats.
Is someone consistently overperforming in their role or in tournaments? Like if there's a player and like, well, their site has a reputation of maybe not being as strong in terms of their finishes in these tournaments, but this one player is like consistently overperforming, or they dragged that team from being what should have been a 5th place team all the way up to 3rd or something like that. So that's somebody who I want to keep an eye on. Is someone developing close chemistry with one or more players? It's all the things that we talked about earlier. I definitely don't think that tryouts is obviously something that can happen in one night or 1 week, but maybe you're just constantly throwing people into a mix of who you think the best 12 players are at any given moment, kind of throwing out a random draw and seeing who does well and where. Did that player who doesn't usually play commander, did they really elevate themselves playing against superior competition? Is the player who's usually ultra aggressive and they get put on medic, were they being a good leader for the team? Were they calling things out and not putting themselves into bad situations? Like those things just start building up in your mind of, okay, I think I'd see who's becoming more flexible, who's becoming better at adapting to situations where they need to play as a team, even where they're unfamiliar with it. Is somebody only going after their stats, or are they making adjustments to, okay, well, this game, this scout is playing way more aggressive, so maybe I'm going to play a little bit more area control scout or something like that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was a lot of questions. Good ones when you're looking for people. So yeah, you definitely like, I'm always looking. I'm always noticing every night when we do our members night. I pull up the stats page and I see the people that are kind of rising, falling, impressing. And I think about the specific context of those games. And yeah, you can definitely find these, you start getting ideas. I wonder how that player would do on a team. I wonder if they were paired with these people. And you start getting these conceptualizations. Do you ever specifically put a player in a game as like a tryout game? Like, okay, I want to see how you do in this specific situation with these players. Like, and if so, have you ever told them, hey, you're being tried out right now?
I probably wouldn't tell them if it was something like a spot on a tournament team on the line, because that's just a lot of pressure for any one game or something like that. But I will say I probably have done stuff like that. And a lot of times when we would play our member nights in SAC, we didn't use the matchmaker a super big amount because it was giving us some wonky games. A lot of times we would be breaking games by hand, and we kind of just got used to players being in different tiers. But there were definitely weeks where I'd be like, hey, you're going to be matched up against a player who's usually ranked above you this
Mm-hmm.
week because I want to see how you do. So maybe long term, I'm thinking this is kind of a tryout to see if you're ready to elevate your game. But I probably wouldn't tell them, oh, yeah, and by the way, if you do well this week, then maybe you'll make the Nats team or something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because A, you don't want to overpromise, and B, that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody on any given moment. But on the flip side, when I was getting back to saying how do people adapt to situations, it always is also a pet peeve of mine when people kind of be like, when they go into a random draw game, like, oh, the other team has players X, Y, and Z. Obviously, they're going to win, blah, blah, blah. And talking down before the game even starts, because you don't know what's going to happen
Try.
when you get in there. Yeah, try. You don't know what they're going to play. You don't know if they're going to play well together. They might have the two strongest players both playing 3-hit, but maybe they both run out and beat your team up real bad at the start of the game, but then they both have to go back for resupply and they can't figure things out, and you guys exploit some kind of loophole.
Here's how you should think about that game. If you're paired up in the game and you are clearly you're projected to lose, man, if you win that game, you're going to look so good.
Yeah. The pressure isn't on you. It's on the other team. It's on the stack team. They're the ones who should be worried about like living up to their reputation. You guys have the opportunity to try something that's different and maybe find some strategy that you hadn't tried before, or it gives you the opportunity to say, well, hey, we're going to be facing situations at least this tough at nationals. If you can't handle it on a social night, how are you going to handle the pressure when you get to the tournament?
Right.
Because you're going to go up against teams that are at least as good as you or better in tournaments. Like, how do you handle that situation where you have to play at the top of your game if you want a chance to win?
Yeah. Okay. You have your team. You're established. You got your 6, and Nats is in 6 months. How should a team practice?
Well, if you can, travel together and play against the best another site has to offer. I really have to give you guys some of the credit for our victory, I think, because we needed someone to push us and get us thinking about our play. And I think it was great that the first like 3 games we played you guys, we lost. We needed those losses. We needed to figure out like where the bumps were, where the little ragged edges were along things. And you need that kind of push and to really test yourself in the fire. The biggest downfall for A teams is not being able to practice against somebody who is of their caliber or better. So if you can arrange a team that far in advance and you know you're all committed to Nats and you know what you want to do, see if you can arrange some kind of trip together to go play against another site's A team in their home site. Because if you can do well in another field, you will probably learn some things about your own field along the way as well, because you'll just pick up little tricks here or there, and it will just give you that much more confidence. Even if you're not winning against teams in their home field, because that's really hard to do, you're at least giving yourself like additional tempering that's just going to make you tougher when it comes to like actually facing the tough matches back at your home site.
Yeah, that's good insight.
So and, that's one thing I would say.
Yeah, it was our pleasure to host you. And we were practicing with the aspirations of our own A team someday, so right back at you.
For sure.
But what else? Is there anything else teams should do to prepare?
Yeah, so if you do have 2 Nats teams at your site, like you have an A or a B team, or you have an A team and some collection of players who will probably end up as the B team, but you're not sure who they are. Like A versus B games are good for figuring out some of the chemistry between you, but the outcome is usually, I won't say predetermined, but obviously the deck is stacked in A team's favor. Those games I think are actually much more useful for B teams if they can get past that psychological hurdle of losing a lot. Because I know it really sucks to be losing week after week after week, but those are how you uncover your weaknesses. Those are how you find the ways to get better. But it's tough, and I know I've been there earlier in my life. That like, oh man, I can't get past this player, but let me keep trying. Let me see what other things that they're doing. Or maybe you add challenges for your A team to make it tougher on them. So maybe you have your A team play with 3 scouts plus a heavy rather than having a commander. So you don't have the ability to nuke and you only have 1 3 hit. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe if the gap is really big, maybe you just play with 4 scouts and you play with no 3 hits.
Mm-hmm.
I generally think that the talent gap has closed enough that I don't think there's a lot of A teams that would need to kind of throw that much of a challenge into it. But maybe you give the B team an extra heavy or an extra ammo, something that will actually make you have to work together to handle the enemy 3 hits, because you're going to need that come tournament time. It's
Yeah, for
easy to
sure.
take, players who are ranked a little bit below you or weaker players to take them one on one. But against some of the heavy hitters who are coming at nationals, you need to work as a team, because if you're a commander and you're getting put down by the heavy every single time and you're never breaking in and you're building special super slow, that's not just a you problem, that's a team problem, because there
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a second angle of attack. You need to do something to distract that heavy a little bit more. And it's been my experience that just adding more players to a B team to make it 6 versus 8 or 6 versus 9 or 6 versus 10 doesn't usually help that much, because it really just means there's more targets for the A team. So I would probably keep that to like a 7v6 or at most like an 8v6, and that's if you're giving the B team 2 ammos and 2 heavies,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
really they should be pushing you super super hard if they have that kind
Mm-hmm.
of advantage. And maybe most importantly, talk about stuff outside of laser tag. The best thing our team did was meet on Discord on average, probably 2 to 3 times a month. I'm not going to say it was every week, but we all live in different places. But there was more kind of team bonding and communication and just getting on the same page with our philosophy to talk about the game, how we think it should be played. We looked at the Auckland map for a long time. We examined other
Mm-hmm.
play tendencies. Just talking about that week after week without even playing, you're just talking about the game, is super, super, super useful to just keep that dialogue going and to always be thinking about new situations. Honestly, my biggest regret from 2017 is that we didn't do this more. I don't feel like there was enough kind of bonding outside of laser tag. It was, okay, we're all good players. We know what we're supposed to do. Let's get out there and do it. And we weren't prepared when there were new situations that we had to adjust to. So don't keep like Nats practice to one night a week. Maybe you only play one night a week, but see if you can have some conversations outside of that. Go hang out, go to a dinner, go hiking, go do something that is just going to get you talking. I mean, I would love, honestly, if I lived in the same city with my 5 teammates who were getting ready for a Nats. I'd love to get us all working out together, to get on a gym schedule or to go running or to go on a bike ride, something like that. That's really kind of, forging you as a team unit.
Yeah, definitely. Those are really good ideas.
I've
Okay.
created a monster.
Oh, definitely. All right. Let's wrap up our journey here. So there's the tryouts, there's the team construction, you're preparing for the tournament gets here, and you don't do as well as you were hoping. Things are not going quite according to plan. The people are playing a different meta than you expected. Someone's underperforming, you're thinking of switching roles, you're wondering I mean, I can tell from experience, and I know you can too, but here's my little soapbox. Just coming from one of the only new sites that have really come up in the last decade. Coming from bottom to where we are now. When tournaments don't go the way you're hoping, you start to become kind of desperate. You start to think about anything that will help you get a win, throwing people onto entirely different roles, trying crazy strategies, um, drinking crazy amounts of energy drinks. Like, I don't know. What if you are having difficulties mid tournament as a team? Um, how do you approach that? Particularly, do you start to deconstruct everything you had prepared all the way up to the tournament, or do you have to build on it?
I think you build on it to a certain degree because you always want to have backup plans going in, that this is the lineup we think is strongest, but here's our kind of first backup if something doesn't work. So we know we have something in the pipe if we need to make an adjustment. But really, the bottom line is just you got to talk. You got to talk throughout the week, and it's got to be talk that doesn't turn into the blame game. if you're the one who screwed up in a game, just admit it, be frank about it, resolve to do better, figure out what went wrong, and just try to view it from every player's perspective. Where were the moments in the game where control was lost? Or looking at a couple different games, where did we kind of lose control of this game? If games are recorded, watch some of them back and see if there's some kind of chronic issue like, oh, you guys are dropping your lives too low before you come back for resupply, or everyone's coming back at the same time. We need to stagger things a little bit better. Let's talk about how we can do that. And like doing the quote unquote suboptimal thing is only suboptimal if the other team can actually exploit it. Otherwise, it might be smart. It actually becomes exploitive of the other team's tendencies. Don't be afraid, like you said, to try something different if you see a need or an opportunity. The two big adjustments that we made during the week is one, we kind of learned from you guys was playing downstairs near blue base in the Auckland field, like was way stronger than I think a lot of people anticipated if you could pull it off well. And I mean, when I had my whole deconstruction of Nats, and we were talking about like why the Auckland players don't do this on a weekly basis, I'm like, well, because you really need everybody operating at essentially on a Nats level in order to make that kind of field control work well. If people are just going out and playing and not really having any kind of concentrated strategy, it's probably not going to work. It's going to fall apart too quickly. But we started playing downstairs because I was just losing too many lives trying to take upstairs in the early game and chronically dying out before enemy medics. It's like, well, we're still winning these games. Like we beat you guys a couple of games where I died before Erwin. We beat Auckland A couple of games where I died before Sneak. Like, but guys, that's not going to get us across the finish line when we play Brisbane. They're just too good at keeping Toyota alive. So if I'm dying out 1 or 2 minutes before him, that's you guys are just leaving way too much on the table. So we got to figure something else out. So we started playing downstairs. I started losing fewer lives. And it seemed like our team, most of the reason we made the adjustment was they were really good at attacking upstairs. We thought we would need upstairs because it would be really hard to attack. But it turned out that our personnel were actually doing pretty well with that. So we just tried flipping that around and it started working a lot better. Until Brisbane figured out the best way to break that. And the very last game, we flipped it again because now Brisbane had adjusted to our downstairs strategy. And it wasn't so much out of desperation, but it was more just of a, hey, they may not expect this for us just to come out guns blazing and have all of us converge on upstairs. So if we can stop them from doing what they want to do and what they might assume that they're just going to get at the start of the game, probably we can start building up an advantage early. And that's what we're going to need. And fortunately, it worked.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. All right. That was awesome.
Yeah. There's no shortcut for talking. I'm sorry to say it. Just you have to
you gotta talk.
Have the conversation as mature human beings and figure out how you're going to make an adjustment and not just say, you guys need to try harder.
Right. That is completely unhelpful. And you got to remember that everybody else is talking as well. People tend to teams evolve throughout the week. Some progress and some regress. And you want to be one of the teams that is progressing and not getting figured out and adapting to what other teams are doing. And I want to talk about like ECT, East Coast 2017 in Detroit. Loveland didn't win a single game except against Detroit B all week. I think we literally lost every single game except against Detroit B. And then we took third place because right at finals, we were able to beat Syracuse by 1,000 points in the match.
Nice.
And then we were able to defeat Detroit B as we had before. And then absolutely got clobbered by Baden in the finals for second place. But still.
Well, happens.
it was honestly, the losing was just a huge blessing in disguise because we had to keep evolving our strategy over and over and over again. And by the time we got to finals, we were doing something brand new, or we had refined ourselves to a point that other teams hadn't really expected to have to fight the newest version of us at that point.
For sure. And I would say much the same thing about this year. I think the best thing that happened to us was you guys beating us the first game of the tournament. It was like, okay, yeah, it's not time to screw around. These other teams want this as badly as we do. So we have to take every game super serious. And I think literally every time during the week, that we maybe started getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, we got punched in the mouth. And we needed to get punched in the mouth because it kept us focused. And okay, yep, we can't take our foot off the gas. The second we start thinking that we're better than this thing, we're going to be shown that we're not. So everybody dig deep and find what you can.
We loved you guys. We wanted, if it wasn't us, we wanted you to win so bad as your fellow US players, but man, we wanted to beat you so badly.
I understand the feeling.
Yeah. So you're welcome, I suppose.
Yeah.
Do you think that covers all the main things you wanted to talk about? I asked you a lot of questions. Is there anything else you want to say about team building and roster construction?
Well, I also talked a lot, so I've tried to answer the questions as best I could. I think that's a pretty good summary. I mean, there's just so many things to talk about that aren't easy to articulate, like defining what chemistry is, defining what synergy is beyond it's people who play well together. Like we could probably talk for 2 more hours about just unpacking what that meaning is, but that's probably a larger meta discussion than we need to have. But that's what I'd say is like the big takeaway is at this stage of the game's development, I think that teamwork is going to beat raw talent going forward because there's just not enough of a talent gap to say that, well, this team is an overwhelming favorite just because they have this much more experience than everybody else. Everybody's been through enough reps now that we're getting that people know what each other's capable of.
Yeah, for sure. I can take a shot at defining synergy and chemistry, though. I really think it is people becoming more than the sum of their parts. So maybe let's say that let's go back to Nats. Beans is playing Commander. Let's say that Beans has like a power level 10. Let's say that when Beans and Luke are attacking at the same time, Luke attacks it in such a way that we break through the enemy team 3 out of 5 times. Maybe his power level goes up to like a 12 or something. This is all just a metaphor. Power levels aren't real. But maybe let's say that when Beans and Josiah attack together, they break in 4 out of 5 times, which is 1 more time than what would have happened with Luke. Maybe you can say Beans' power level goes up to like a 13 or something. So, maybe you choose in any given situation. Oh, maybe put Josiah on scout over Luke. I'm putting myself down as the example for this situation. I know I do well, but when you're choosing players, like think about it. Like Beans literally becomes a more effective commander when he's playing alongside one scout versus another, and that's what you're looking for. The overarching team power level, quote unquote, increases based on certain players. Maybe even if Luke and Josiah individually have the same power level themselves,
Sure. Or think about scenarios like for nuke rushes, things like that. Would you, if in a vacuum, you'd rather have a commander you can count on to get 4 nukes every game versus a commander you can count on to get 3 nukes every game?
Right, exactly. In a vacuum.
But by the same token, if you can put the scouts around the commander who only gets 3 nukes a game, such that they're basically getting 2 extra medic hits off of every nuke because they're breaking into the resupply, they're getting a reset, they're kicking the medic, and you have the other scout to pick them up. Well, now that commander's 3 nukes became 15 lives off the enemy medic. If that commander who's always getting 4 nukes, if people aren't capitalizing on their nukes, that's only 12 lives. So what would you rather have? You'd rather have the 15 lives off the enemy medic than the 12. So just because a player, maybe is playing at the super top level or is able to score more points than another one, like does the combo work better the other way? Like we talked about with Morange and Leech, or like you were saying with Beans and Josiah or Beans and you.
Right. Or one more example, just to throw it out there, we have a player named Loki. He likes to play a very sneaky sniper type of scout. And a long time ago, we did a season where he was on my team while we played this tournament. At first, we had a player named Mason, and they played more similarly together. And Loki was averaging like a 5K scout. We eventually had to sub out Mason for Jarrett, who is one of the most loud, in-your-face scouts you could ever imagine.
True.
And Loki's average went up about 3K because having the loud distraction allowed Loki to play his playstyle way better. And yeah, these are all just examples of like one player makes another player worth more.
For sure. And I think that's kind of how we thought about Thunder in that scout role, that it's like, okay, we know what these other players are going to do well. Anything that we might have left out, Thunder can handle. Because he'll just kind of shore up the weakness on that side. And yeah, I definitely learned a lot about positioning in the Loveland field from getting shot by Loki at random spots. I'm like, oh, so that's where you need to stand.
Oh, he'll do that. Oh yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for coming on, DK. What's one thing you want players to take away from this discussion?
So I would say that winning is not just a question of what am I willing to do? Because you can say that you're willing to commit to getting better, to try to play the best that you can, to be the best player at your site. But that's only you. That's only one person. So the question you also need to ask is not just what are you willing to do, but what am I willing to sacrifice for the team to operate the way that it should? It's really human to want the glory, the spotlight, the credit for something going well. But can you submerge your ego to the larger goal, which is taking home first place for the tournament? Like, even if you're not maybe going to have the person who has the spotlight shining on you, you still win or lose as a whole team, and it belongs to everybody. And I think that in the last tournament, that everybody on the team in one game or another had some kind of crucial contribution that they made that contributed to team success. So it really was a 6-person effort. So what do you need to do to get to that spot? Is it just a matter of you training and trying to be as good as you can? Or is it also, are you willing to like forego being the person who is leading the attack, and maybe you're more of a support role because that's what works better?
Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I want people to take away from this discussion is recognizing that skill is not the only thing that will qualify a player for playing on a team. That emotional regulation and ability to overcome one's ego, play for the team, play whatever role's needed of them, and give their hardest every game, to take losing well, to be able to have discussions with constructive criticism. All these things we've discussed, it is so much more than just can they get a high score.
For sure. There's so many intangibles, as they would say, that go into what makes someone an effective team player.
Okay, DK, I don't know if you have any kind of like a web presence or anything, but is there anything you want to plug for the listeners?
I mean, chance. I am the co-host on the Resupply podcast that we do every week. At least most weeks. Your semi-weekly double tap of all things Laserforce and Space Marines related. That is on. It's on Twitch on Saturdays, 1 p.m. Auckland time, which right now is 6 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Mountain, 9 Eastern. But when clocks start getting set forward and moving back, the time drifts a little bit in the US. So if you can tag it to Auckland time, you'll hopefully know what time the stream is every week.
Definitely.
The only other thing I would put out there is I did record a few commentary videos on games that were played at the most recent Nats in Auckland. Some of them by interviewing other players who played in the games, and one of them for our final game, I just did solo to kind of do a breakdown on that. So if you want to check that out, that is on the Resupply's YouTube page, and we have a playlist for those commentaries.
Heck yeah. I'm going to put links to all that in our description. Definitely go check out the Resupply. DK gets on with 2 other players, Guy Next Door and Thanatos. Very awesome. Not only are you entertaining, good personalities, but you've been around the scene playing tournaments for years, and you're real leaders in the community. I would get on there, and you can make active comments during their podcast, and they'll respond to you and your funny quips and your questions. Definitely a good time. Go check them out. But that'll do it for today's show. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you, Death Knight, for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Been my pleasure.